Hello, everybody. My name is Taylor Chambers, and I am welcomed by Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Finlayson-Fife, for being here. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So I'm excited. This is, I'm looking forward to our interview. We had a topic that we decided on ahead of time that I know is going to be really valuable. And all of this is toward the end of, shifting from that unwanted porn use to fearless sexuality. And today we'll be emphasizing specifically how intimate relationships can be used, I guess, as a vehicle toward that end. And so looking forward to that. Now, if you are not familiar with Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, A, you should be, but B, I'll share a little bit about you and you fill in the gaps if I miss anything. But a relationship and sexuality coach with a PhD in counseling psychology. So, of course, we access you through online stuff, but your history and experiences through not only academics, but therapy and counseling and all of that. You are a popular podcast guest. I think that's where prolific speaker, and so that's where many people come into contact with you. Podcast host as well. A set of online courses that are very well reviewed. My wife and I have enjoyed a couple of them ourselves, and just had a really profound impact for our relationship and how we develop. And then, retreats and stuff like that. You're coming up to, you're coming down to Southern Utah here soon. So you'll be in my stomping grounds in a little bit. So, but yeah, overall, I mean, your work centers on healthy relationships and healthy sexuality, and particularly within the LDS community is where much of your work it shows up. So am I missing anything? Anything else you want to throw out there?
Well, that's it. I mean, I'm married. I have 3 children, 3 almost all adult children. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that's the more important stuff that we often don't talk about here, but yeah. Well, and I guess that kind of, I know that you're on a lot of podcasts and you speak a great deal. And I don't know that I've come up with any questions that are like brilliantly unique or anything like that. But I did want to ask, because so often we get this side of you that is, astute, articulate, intelligent, all of that. But I was curious, how do your loved ones experience you? I mean, do they get more of the same, or do they get a different side of you, or how would they describe
always
you?
Composed, always articulate. I actually saw your question, so I asked my daughter this morning. I'm like, if you had to describe me in 3 words, how would you do it? And she's like, a cool mom. No, I'm just kidding. She said, let me think. What'd she say? Strong-willed, insightful, and brave. That's what she said. Yeah.
Hey, those are great.
So, I know strong-willed. I don't know what that means. Determined or bossy. I'm not sure which.
Can go both ways.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know. I think that, I didn't have a chance to ask others like how they would say it, because I'm like, what would they actually say rather than what would I like to imagine they would say?
Yeah, because that's different.
But something around that. I mean, I bet my son would say something like, insightful. I think my son would say, affectionate, kind. And I think there's some level of me holding expectations that they all feel and don't always like. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like live life well. Let's
yeah. Put down the screen. Let's do something. Come on.
Okay, there you go. Well, that's better. It's been a month or 2 ago now, but I was hustling my daughter through bedtime, and she just looked at me and you're like, "You're a wild ass." And we were like, "Where did you get that?" I mean, I immediately cracked up, but I think she got it out of the Bible. I think there was something.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I was like, "Do you know what that means?" She's like, "No." Anyway, so I've got some work to do with my daughter, but hopefully we're on a road toward that. Well, thanks for sharing. And it is all of these relationships, these family relationships, the intimate relationships that we're generally talking about today. And so, I guess kind of the starting point is that a lot of times we view problems in the relationship as like there's something wrong with you or there's something wrong with me. And you very much adopt a systems theory perspective, which, for viewers is just looking at like the context within an surrounding an individual's experience.
Yes.
And so I guess from that point of view, so many viewers, I think, are in this place of like, I have a problem, I need to fix myself as it relates to porn. But you might see that porn plays a role within that broader context. And so I guess I'm curious, as you've worked with so many couples around pornography directly, but also more generally sexuality, do you see that there are common patterns or ways in which pornography can show up in that relational context?
Yeah, I mean, one of the more salient versions, but I think there's more than what I'll say right now. But I think if you go back to adolescence and so on with someone who starts looking at porn more compulsively and as a kind of pattern, they're often in a family system that doesn't make a lot of room for emotion and for being knowable. And so sometimes there's a lot of stress in the family and the child doesn't know how to deal with that stress, and they're looking for a kind of private outlet. Very often, the person that looks at porn is often the person that looks the best on the outside. Often, it's not always this way, but they're kind of handling a lot for the family. So the parents might be under a lot of stress, conflict, and the child that looks at porn often gets a lot of praise for being the good student, for being the righteous one at church or whatever. And they feel a lot of pressure and they don't know where to bring their actual feelings, their vulnerability. And this becomes a way to be vulnerable, even actually, like to feel sexual feelings, to feel this sense of almost transcendence actually through porn. And it feels like a kind of solution. And of course, what happens though is that this pattern of a split between what one presents in the world and what one does can grow because it drives a sense of shame. Therefore, I have to look even better on the outside, but I have this secret. And then that pattern often goes into marriage, right? So it's often the person that looks like the ideal partner, right? The one that's got it all together. And it's not always this, because this is one of them, always got it together, always kind of, lives up to the ideals of one's society or faith. But they bring with them a pattern of coping in this kind of self-referencing private way outside of relationship. And so porn can be one of the ways, it's not always the way, of course, that one can go and find a kind of comfort without the vulnerability, the exposure. And it's not necessarily about one's wife, for example. It's not like, oh, you're not attractive to me. It's just that this is where I go when I get super stressed. This is what I do. But the other challenge with it is that not only is it that you're maybe engaging in a behavior pattern that drives a deeper sense of unworthiness or that you have something to hide. I think it's also that, you've channeled your sexuality not to really be about loving and being loved, knowing and being known, sharing oneself. You've started to pattern your sexuality more in less vulnerable form. And so it makes intimate sex difficult because of that pattern, but also because maybe even starting into marriage, you weren't sure how much people really wanted to know you or how much you wanted to be known. So that often shows up in marriage, and it often gets coupled with someone who is looking for that high functioning, I'm just going to do it in the gender typical way for a moment, the high functioning man, the one that's going to kind of have all the answers. And so they often project their own fantasies onto who the man is, and the man wants to imagine he is that for her. So it drives even more hiding. And when she finds out, it can be a really big rupture to what one thought the marriage was really about, and can be a pretty painful one. So that's not an unusual thing. And then one other thing I would say, not an unusual pattern is that sometimes one, is trying to be the nice guy, the ideal person, the good guy, the one who really, will do anything for his wife, in part because he feels like he has a secret or something about him that's not sufficient. Therefore, he's trying to earn love. So he's doing all the time to get his wife to love him and to prove his sufficiency. But alongside that is a sense of resentment and anger, and I have to earn love all the time, and I have to keep you happy all the time, and you're never actually happy with me, and you never want to have sex with me. And then that resentment makes it feel like, going to the porn is a kind of act of hostility in some ways, an act of like, I'm angry and I have a right. And so it can kind of justify the hiding and the, doing what you want, because you're in the illusion that I give so much in the marriage. And I can say more about illusion, but I just mean like it's more of you're trying to earn something more than that you're such a giver. But the anger that it doesn't earn you what you want then justifies the divided behavior, which then makes you feel inferior again and like you have to earn.
Yeah, it's almost like there's this sense of like to get what I want out of this experience, I have to play this game. But by playing the game, there's increased resentment, and it actually doesn't end up being effective.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, geez, so much of that doesn't just sound like a pattern. That just sounds like me. So I imagine a lot of the viewers are going to be, feeling the same thing.
Yeah.
Of just like kind of the dynamic of, how we grew up and kind of the pressure and stresses there.
Yes.
And then how we bring that into a marriage. And then it sets up these kind of political interactions, between spouses.
Yes.
And so it's going to be, I guess I'll say it's going to be very difficult to, for example, just try and remove a porn behavior from that whole dynamic, without looking at that broader context of like, well, what is leading into it, and what is the message conveyed within this, and so forth.
Right, because even if the internet shut down and there was no access to porn, it's not like the marriage would then be a good marriage, or that the person would then be a developed person, or that they would be more intimate. So, sometimes when people, I do think porn has a negative impact, but I think sometimes people think too much like the porn went and hijacked a perfectly good human. And I think it's not that simple. I think it's more that it is exposing, the behavior is exposing a liability in the person who's viewing it, and also in the marriage, a place where development is needed.
Yeah. I heard someone kind of pose this question about like what happened, and then kind of the backup question is like, what had to be true in order for that to happen? So what happened is often, well, I viewed porn, or, my husband viewed porn, or whatever it might be. But then it's that other question that you're asking of like, well, what had to be true in order for that to make sense, or to have some function or meaning within this system?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And, an added dynamic, which won't be news to anybody here, but there can often be, I think, in families in which there's a lot of anxiety about sex, a lot of fear around it, it can also drive some of how tantalizing porn is in the beginning. So there's more like, there's no place for me to be real. I can't share my feelings. And I'm also doing something really dark and terrible. And, I know I, as a kid, they had Sears catalogs, and there was a bra section, and my siblings and I would, we'd always want to go look at we would look at the bra section and be like, I can see a nipple, through there. And,
the secret forbidden thing.
Yeah. There was a neighbor, he had a pinup calendar and so on. But I do think, honestly, in my family, there wasn't a lot of anxiety about sex. There wasn't a lot. So even though I kind of thought, we shouldn't be looking at it, or maybe I like seeing that pinup calendar more than I should, there wasn't this feeling of like, that makes me a terrible person. I think that I knew on some level that just made me a person. And so I think that helps a lot, because some of my clients talked about that they just felt like they were there with the worst, most deplorable sins of, the spectrum of human behavior. And so
Yeah.
that can drive a lot of hiding and difficulty actually asking for help if you're having a problem of compulsively viewing porn and you feel out of control around it. So it's
Right.
that shaming element is also a piece.
Yeah, the shame and the anxiety that can kind of be this extra um, extra layer kind of entrapping someone here, because it makes it extra tantalizing, as you're saying, and more
Yes.
complicated to step out of.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so now I use the phrase fearless sexuality, and in some of my other material, I'm talking about intention, integrity, and intimacy with that.
Mm.
And so, I mean, those are concepts that are important to me, but I wanted your take, because I know particularly with, integrity as part of your work with self-development and
Mm-hmm.
intimacy with, a couple's development.
Yeah.
How are these principles relevant when it comes to pornography, and how would one go about trying to develop more integrity, more intimacy, and however you want to split that up, one and then the
Sure.
other, or if they're, if they're kind of
Yeah.
combined.
So, a lot of times, some approaches, and I don't pretend to really understand all the approaches out there to helping somebody with a porn issue that would like some help. But sometimes the approach is shaming of sex itself. Like, sex is the problem. Your desires are the problem. The fact that you find a woman attractive is the problem. When, in my view, those things are not the problem. It's the lack of integrity in the person's behavior. And so if you just kind of go back to some of those examples of somebody who, understandably, in a family system where sex is shamed and there's a lot of stress and has a lot of pressure on himself to kind of achieve all the kind of familial and social ideals, goes to porn, that is understandable, but it is a split in integrity, an understandable one, but nonetheless a split. Because it's not just about privacy, it's about masking and hiding something and trying to get something that other people don't know about. And what often happens is that becomes solidified, a kind of dishonest way of being in relationship to others and oneself. I was recently working with somebody who had really was quite compulsive about pornography, but had really convinced himself and was trying to convince his wife that this was just about his sex drive, and this was not a problem, even though he was going to it 4 times a day, often going to it when he almost even didn't want to go to it, but just almost felt like it was such a pattern that was so entrenched. And what he said to me now that he's kind of waking up to it and the impact it's been having on his life, and because it was escalating and he was doing more and more difficult things, he was saying, like, I can't believe how long and how well I lied to myself about the fact that something was out of control in me. And that I really wasn't at peace. It didn't make me feel good about myself. It didn't make me feel more able to be in my marriage. I didn't have any real respect for it. That's why I was hiding it and or trying to defend it to my wife. And now that I'm living in more aligned with my true values, what I actually respect, it's like I feel so much better. I feel so much freer. Like, life is so much easier than it was. And so it's like coming into alignment with our higher selves. Somebody asked me, like, what do you mean by unwanted porn use? It's like, I don't feel good about viewing porn, but I always want it. Like, when I'm, like, why else would I be viewing it if I didn't want to be viewing it? And I mean, I'm not the one who coined that phrase. I don't know why he was asking me in particular, but I think that what that means is that it's not in line with your higher self. It's in line with your lesser self. Now, our lesser selves are impulsive, ego-driven, often looking for comfort in the moment. Our higher selves are looking more at what's the broader plan here? Like, what's the ultimate goal?
Right.
So our lesser selves might want the cake. Our higher selves wants to be healthier and trimmer and so on. And so it's like, how do we align ourselves with what's best in us and what is coming from our most deliberate and conscious selves, our intentional selves?
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I've thought about using the term dystonic porn use, but nobody knows. Dystonia is a little further out there. But yeah, because I like how you describe it. Well, you describe it well, of like, the bigger, broader goals, the larger life values that we want to ascribe to and live by.
Right.
And so, well, and it sounds like for you, the things like the hiding, the defensiveness, and justifications and things like that, those are all markers that are
Yes.
indicating like this is not in integrity.
Exactly.
And that's the part that seems to really matter.
Exactly.
Is that split is the maybe area of focus? Is that how you would
100%? Because if you want to have more
Okay.
self-confidence and you want to be capable of an intimate marriage, and by intimate, I don't mean you're just gazing into each other's eyes and, only thinking the purest of thoughts. By intimate, I mean you're knowable. There's not anything to hide. You feel a sense of freedom and ease, and you can really be yourself and share sexuality and share connection with one another without a sense that you have to mask or contort or hide or manage anxiety in that. And that's where people are the happiest, is what, couples research is the happiest couples have a sense that they can truly be themselves in their marriage. But a lot of people are operating in a way in which they have no intention of being themselves, because they think if they were themselves, they wouldn't be loved. They wouldn't be accepted. And so they are participating in a split. And as you said, Taylor, like, yes, that sometimes we don't think we're in a split. For example, I worked with a couple where he was kind of defiant. He was more angry and determined, and he would say what he wanted and so on. So he was like, I'm being true to myself. But he was a bully, and he looked at porn all the time, and it was distressing for his wife. And I remember asking him once, like, what if your daughter grew up and married someone just like you? What would you think of your son-in-law? And he immediately was like, oh, I'd hate him. I'd hate him. Now, he didn't hold back in saying that. I'm like, well, tell me why. Like, because he would bulldoze my daughter. Okay. So he could see it, like he could see it so clearly when he started thinking about his daughter being treated like that.
Yeah.
But see, that's a lack of integrity, even though he wasn't necessarily hiding. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily require hiding things you do, but it means that your truest self doesn't respect the behavior.
Yeah. Well, when it moved away from his personal experience to, even just so far as his daughter, it clearly highlighted values of like, no, there ought to be reciprocity in the relationship.
Right.
But I guess for us, the fog of war gets really thick when it's our own lives, and it gets hard to see that sometimes.
Very hard to see.
So that's good. It's not just hiding is not the only marker there, but anytime we can recognize that there's something that I respect more, or something that I would aspire to become or want in the world, that's kind of our.
And a lot of us want to have self-confidence. So we think of, if we're a bully, that the bullies have self-confidence. They don't. I mean, they just railroad. They dominate. But when you think about what your higher self is, if you want to have true self-respect, true self-confidence, you have to live up to your highest self. There's really no way around it. And so people that live in accordance with their honest values earn self-confidence, and it's a legitimate self-confidence. It doesn't mean they never have anxiety or doubt or self-doubt, because it's important to have self-doubt sometimes and important to have anxiety. But your sense of being efficacious in the world, your sense of being respect-worthy, your sense of being willing to be knowable, that you don't have anything to hide or apologize for, all of that goes up. And so it increases your ability to be in real connection with other people, because you don't have to pretend anything. And you don't have the anxiety of trying to manage how you're seen, because you're like, well, what you see is what you get. I am who I am, and not in a, like, you have to accept it, but you recognize that you really are a person who's being honest with himself or herself, who is striving to truly live a life of integrity. And so it makes it easy to let somebody in on who you are.
Yeah. You're not wrestling with yourself, so someone else can stand right next to you without taking some collateral damage. So tell me if there's more to it than this, but it seems like that kind of self-development of coming into alignment with values,
Mm-hmm.
seeing yourself clearly and then coming into alignment, is either a prerequisite or maybe a direct step into cultivating intimacy. I mean,
Yes.
is that the kind of the full story for intimacy, or is there something beyond just that kind of living by values? Because
It's
you're
pretty
already talking
close.
about being seen.
Yeah, it's pretty close to the whole story. I mean, and there's approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy. There's therapies that do a good
Hmm.
job of helping you understand the pattern of behavior, perhaps understanding what it's trying to solve. And then in that more deliberateness and acknowledging this pattern, it frees you up to choose more deliberately what
Hmm.
is a way that of handling these things that I would feel better about, that would create more strength in my life, that would make me feel more at peace. So, the more we do that, the more we're in alignment, the more capable we are of being known. But what I also think, and I think it's in line with your fearless sexuality idea, is that when you learn to love through sexuality and be loved, you don't have anything to fear anymore about sex,
Hmm. Yeah.
because it's our embodiment, our humanity, something that's some of the best of what it is to be human, but you're in relationship to it in a way that you love and are loved through it, that your sexuality increases your sense of joy, increases your sense of self-confidence. It increases your kind of alignment with yourself because you're not ashamed of your sexuality anymore. You're not afraid that
Right.
it's running the show. You're in charge, right? And you get to decide how you relate to it, but you relate to it in a way that accrues to your self-respect and to the respect of a partner. Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. Yeah. By first kind of sorting out how I live by my values, I can bring that into the world of another person
Yes.
and allow myself to be seen by them, and see them as they are, and we see
Right.
it all and choose to come together. And um,
One of the
yeah.
questions I ask in the men's course I teach is, if you are sort of apologetic for your sexuality, and a lot of men are, right? They've
Yeah.
learned to be apologetic. They've learned like sex is something that's kind of destructive. It can either destroy them or destroy a spouse. And they're often looking to their wives to make sex okay, to make them okay. And some of that is natural, right? I'm not saying that's strange that they're looking to their wife to kind of get feedback about who they are. But a lot of times they are in this kind of entitlement and apology. They're in this they vacillate between both things. But one of the questions I ask is, what do you have to apologize for in your sexuality? And I mean it as a real question, because have
Mm.
you inherited just false sense of shame and apology, right? When you are a loving person who is loving with his sexuality and cares a lot about his wife and cares about her well-being, then you don't have anything to apologize for. Or are you relating to sex in a way that is entitled, is a kind of taking? You're trying to not love her, but do you love me, and trying to get something? Are you,
Hmm.
being indulgent and objectifying of other humans? Are you doing things with it that you actually don't feel good about? In order to be unapologetic for your sexuality, which is very attractive as a woman, thinking about men who are able to be at peace and at ease in their masculine, essence, right? That's very
Right.
attractive. But that's attractive when it's non-apologetic for good reason, because this is someone who doesn't
Yeah.
use their sexuality to take advantage
Hmm.
and is comfortable in their own skin and is able to love through their sexuality,
Hmm.
right? And so there's something to, a lot of times we're like, we press it, push it down, rather than how do we embody it and use it for good?
Right. Right. Yeah, which is too bad because I mean, you can't successfully like push it down all the way.
No, no, you can't.
It'll come back out some
That's
way.
right.
Um, but yeah, so kind of asking that question of how do I then channel this, and what work do I need to do in order to feel like this is not indulgent, this isn't asking a favor, this isn't owed to me,
Right.
but something that I can bring to a relationship that would be well received because I trust that I'm bringing it up in the right
Right.
tone, or in within from the right place within me.
Right, exactly.
So
And women's
mhm.
sexuality, is very if you think about women from a sort of psychobiological point of view, women take a big risk to open up their bodies and be sexual. And so a lot of times women don't want to be sexual, and we mistake that for women are not that sexual. Rather than women, for good reason, are very picky about sexuality, because you want to know, does this person just want to have sex, or do they want to have sex with me? As in, is it about me, or is it about that this is the only legitimate outlet for them? And so women are very, very tuned into the question of, are you invested in my well-being? Are you invested in my offspring? Okay. These are like hardwired inclinations in most women. And so they're looking for, do you care about me? Right? Did you notice that I got my hair cut? You know, I mean, we've got some jokes around some of these kinds of things, but so just the other day, my husband got his haircut, but I didn't notice, you know, so he's like, I feel so hurt. But, you know, but there's like, but there's like, you know, those are kind of markers of, do you care about my well-being, or just in as much as it serves you? And a lot of us care about our partner's well-being in as much as it serves us. You know, I was talking to a client recently, and he did something that was kind of overtly sexy and so on. And it sort of triggered her, and she just got really reactive because of some history between them. And so in the session, he was like, dang it, you know, like I felt so bad because now I'd blown it for him. Okay. So that is, it's very exposing of the fact that his mind is not thinking about the fact that his wife's in an honest reaction to something, given some of his behavior patterns. He's thinking more like, how do I thread this needle to manipulate her into what I want, as opposed to what is it about me that it's easy for her to go into a reaction, because he isn't that trustworthy. I don't mean that he's dishonest or doing really dark things. I mean, he's not trustworthy in that he's thinking about sex more in terms of what he wants and what he's trying to get his wife to give him. And so she's always kind of like this around him on some level, for good reason.
Well, and that strikes a chord, just because, you know, my wife and I have, because of me, I suppose, have this history of like, when we engage in conflict, I'm like, okay, what needs to be said here? You know, what tool or technique do I apply in order for this to go away? Which is, of course, a maddening stance for me to take from her point of view. And you are really supporting people and being authentic and coming through and like, where is it really at? Because if this conflict is going to take us somewhere meaningful, that's a starting, like a prerequisite to it.
Absolutely. That's right. So,
and I guess I wanted to ask.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, share your thoughts on that. But
it might be where you're heading right now with your question. But I think like a lot of people that are conflict avoidant often like to look at porn, okay, because it's a way of getting to better feelings, getting away from negative feelings. And so, you know, conflict tolerance, you know, staying in the invalidation and the disequilibrium of conflict. And I don't mean like hostility. It doesn't have to be contemptuous. I just mean that there's difference of opinion, you know. And so going back to this client who's like, dang it, I overplayed my hand. You know, this is just, I should have done this thing. Then we'd be having sex, right? That he's not thinking in terms of, why is that so upsetting for my wife? What is it about it? What do I have to do with it? Because he does have something to do with it. He doesn't want that because it disrupts his view of himself. And he prefers the idea that he has an anxious wife about sex rather than he's a difficult person to open up to. And so he wants to keep it on her and her liabilities rather than on his own. And so that's the conflict is not about that it's good to fight per se, but that in this difference, in this disruption, there is important information that you can, if you will avail yourself to it, can help you grow into someone more capable of good sex, right? This wife wants to have good sex. She just doesn't want the sex on offer. And he keeps insisting that it's her problem, not his own.
And so when we meet reality, we get good information about how we can adapt to better work with reality, I suppose.
Yes.
And so if we, which is very common for us, are getting defensive or blaming other things,
yes,
and we're missing that really valuable opportunity. Now, it is difficult to kind of go within ourselves and
yes.
figure out what needs to be learned, because then we have to like deal with, ego death and all that.
Ego death is the worst. Yeah.
So very painful process, but very, very valuable. And a lot of times as we're navigating, I guess, the development of like, if we are taking on that responsibility, if we are engaging in conflict from a more authentic place, if we are trying to be more real with our sexuality, this doesn't look like immediate alleviation of symptoms. Mm-hmm. In fact, a lot of times things worse. Can get extra messy.
That's right. Absolutely right.
And so where do we go to? Because we're not looking at like, how comfortable is this is not a good gauge of, are we doing the work or not? Right. Is the symptom showing up is not a good gauge. How would we differentiate between, we're breaking through into something beyond this, or we're just breaking down, right. This is not working.
Yeah. So first of all, just to kind of underscore that point. Yeah. If you need a better kitchen, it doesn't just like get better because you do one thing, right? If you need a new kitchen, you've got to take the old one down, and it gets way worse. You don't have an oven, you don't have a sink, you don't have all the things, you don't know how to get a meal for the next several months because it's all falling apart. And so it's very disorienting and disorganizing, but necessary because you got to get down to the bare bones and start over and build a new kitchen from the ground up. Okay. Yeah. To make something structurally and qualitatively better. You can paint, you can do little things to tweak, but if you don't take it down to the structure, you can't have a qualitatively different reality. And so in good therapy or good coaching, a lot of the work I'm doing is I'm trying to help people see things that they don't want to see. They're not even coming really, they're coming to, they want the easy new kitchen. They don't necessarily want to say, you got to take out all of the appliances. You've got to take all these things out because it's so painful. It is ego death, but that's the way they really get free. They get something much better, but that is what is required. And so, so how do you know if it's just destructive or if it's destructive towards something positive? Is this about a disorganization, or is this about a, basically, you're crushing the life of the marriage? I think that the big difference is, do people go into self-obsession in this, or do they step into more wisdom? So if somebody gets hard news about themselves, the ones that are growing, they feel terrible. They may be defensive at first, but they ultimately are coming towards what is true. Those are the people I have so much respect and hope for. And we're going to be giving away a bundle from some of the work I do on my Room for Two podcast, where I'm working with real couples. There's a couple with a porn issue, but I am, I have a lot of respect for this couple, because when I tell them hard things about themselves, they come towards it. Now, they're not like, oh, this feels so great. I mean, I'm sure they probably hated every episode in some ways, because it's not easy to hear truths about yourself. Just like when my daughter said I was strong-willed, I'm like, really? That was the first word? And so,
not the first thing I wanted to hear. Sure.
Exactly. I was a cool mom, But anyway, so, but it never feels good, but that becomes the information that you can use to do something different. And so what you do is, it's not that it feels good, but people use it to expand their agency, to actually choose better, to choose more deliberately. And, so when it's going the wrong direction, people use it to, like, I remember one mother-daughter came in and talked to me, and the daughter was trying to talk about what it was like with the mother, that the mother was just hovered and overly involved and, trying to micromanage everything that the adult daughter did. And so the adult daughter was saying, Mom, I love you, but it's just too much. I need you to not be so involved in my relationships. So the mother, it's like, I guess I'm just a terrible, terrible mother. I guess I'm just stuck. Like everything I've ever done is wrong. And before, then the daughter starts going in to comfort the mother, right? Okay, no, totally messed up, right? This is the mother
the role reversal
insisting, insisting that the focus stay on her, that her feelings are the most important thing. They're more important than her daughter's reality. And so that's a kind of, it's not that the session was destructive. It's that the mother was using the information to basically spiral into her ego preoccupation and not have the courage to step into something better, to acknowledge the truth in what her daughter was saying. It's not that her mother had never done anything right, and the daughter didn't say that, but what was true in what the daughter was saying, and the mother didn't want to deal with that. The other times is when somebody's telling the truth to their partner, but it's not about, I want something better. And can I talk about why sometimes it's difficult to be sexual with you, for example, or something like that? It's driven more like, I'm going to use the truth to basically make you feel small, to make me feel big, to say it's not my fault, it's all your fault. Then it's more about trying to shame, humiliate, abuse someone in the name of truth. Yeah.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking that it's not so much that there's this qualitatively different, like good destruction versus bad destruction, but there are a couple of ways in which we can use what's already breaking down to our own growth. And that is to engage with it and shifting out of that self-preoccupation and more into, you might have to help me out here. It's in part, there is still the self of like, what am I learning about myself in this?
Yeah, but it's not like ego preoccupation. It might be self-focused, like what is true in what my partner's saying. So it's using what they are saying about you to take an honest look at yourself and to deal with what you in your heart knows is true. You're not doing what they tell you to do. You're using what they say to tell yourself what to do. Does that make sense? That's just a very different thing. And I would say it's not that it can be, some destruction is bad, right? If it's abusive, if it's, psychologically manipulative, if you can't see your way out of that, it can be literally destroying your internal compass. Right. So if some people are hanging out with abusive people, they can get less and less able to kind of hold on to the truth of who they are and so on. So there is that reality. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good clarification. And so it's there can be paying attention to self, but it's again, leaning into like, there is something for me to draw from this so that I can align with my higher self, as opposed to like, I got to figure out how to, self-preservation. I've got to figure out how to like stay intact in this. It's like trusting that, maybe there is something in me that needs to be dismantled.
That's right.
If I'm getting this feedback and it runs through my internal filters and I agree with it, it's time to take a hard look at this part of me.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Well, so I was curious, because illustrations help us kind of see this. Is there a time where you have gone through a developmental crisis of like, the kitchen was taken apart and then we ended up rebuilding it, either from your own life or someone close to you or a client or something like that, just to kind of illustrate what this process might look like?
Yeah, I have plenty of them. I'm just trying to think of like the best, the easy, because they're sort of involved stories, but
there's stories and there are internet stories, and we got to know which. There are stories and there are internet stories, and not all of our life stories belong on the internet.
Oh, yeah. Well, these are all kind of stories that I've sort of told at different times in the teaching that I do. But, I know that one developmental crisis was just getting married, because I was really quite afraid to create an intimate partnership with anyone. I knew I wanted to be married, and I knew that it really mattered to me to find someone to love. But I was really afraid of marriage because I'd grown up learning that marriage, you sort of subvert yourself to be in a marriage if you're a good woman. And I just didn't want that. So when I started dating my now husband, I really tried to not step in. I wanted to be wanted by him. I wanted, the clarity that he brought, that I was the person he was interested in, but I didn't want to actually step in and invest and let him really in on me and really let him matter to me. That just felt terrifying for me. And so what I did was I straddled for almost 3 years, which is a long time to straddle. I would sort of vacillate, but I wanted him to stay invested in me without choosing him back. And I came to a crisis for myself because I did not like, first of all, I think he was getting tired of it and was thinking that he might move back to California where he's from. And
sometimes other people start our crises for us.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like he was starting to say, like, maybe I need to let this go and take no as an answer. And I also just did not like who I was. I remember sitting on the steps talking to my roommates. It was my birthday. And I just said, like, this is probably one of the first times I've ever had a birthday. And I don't feel good about who I am. I do not. It sounds a little weird to say that, but I just remember feeling like I normally just felt a sense of hope and a sense of whatever about the future on birthdays. And this birthday, I remember just feeling like I'm not living in a way that I respect. There's something I just cannot solve. And I couldn't. I was sort of stuck in a meaning trap, and I couldn't like move forward and marry John, and I couldn't break up with him successfully either. And so I started going to a therapist then and just started clarifying like what were my anxieties and my fears. But when it came right down to it, I came to a certain point where it was like I had to make a decision one way or the other. And that's usually how we get out of crises, is we're at this crossroads and we don't want to choose. But if we're going to move forward, we have to choose. And so it was like either tolerate not having John in my life or fully step in, because I couldn't tolerate it anymore. I had to do one or the other. And I remember it just like, I felt like I was stepping off a cliff when I really stepped in. But it literally was a developmental watershed moment. Like something really changed in me when I did that, because I saw that I didn't crash to the ground and things got better and I could see more clearly. And I went from all this ambivalence to feeling enormous gratitude that I got to be with someone as good as John and that he waited and tolerated that process of my uncertainty. So, but it wasn't just about stepping in. It was also like being someone capable of making a commitment, of like actually narrowing my choices and saying, I will stand here and I'm committed to love and be here fully, even when it doesn't give me all the validation I want. And so that was for sure a developmental process for me that I'm very grateful I got through.
Yeah, I love that illustration. Thanks so much for sharing, because, I think it's very relatable where we do find ourselves at this crossroad of like, there are things that I want. There's a cost I'm not really ready to pay.
That's right.
And then we do have to reach that point if it's going to go somewhere where we resolve that dilemma, figure out what we do with it. And it sounds like that throughout that process, you really kept in mind that higher self of like, who is it that I would respect being here?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's true that, it's often when we're at crossroads, meaning we want two things and we can't really have both. That's usually when we split from our integrity, is when we're trying to get both, right? I want to look at porn and I want my wife to be happy with me. And so I got to hide it from her. I mean, that's the only way this is going to work. Or I got to convince her that she's just, sex negative and doesn't get how great sex is and she should just be cool with it. Whatever it is, but we often do things to try to not be forced into, I get one or the other. I can look at porn and have a wife who's unhappy with me, or I can not look at porn and have a wife who's happy with me. And I only get one of those two. And, who wants only one? Don't we all want both choices when it comes to life?
Which is why we try and patch them together.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great distinction. And honestly, there are one or two of those dilemmas in my life where I'm like, I don't think I've really made that choice yet.
Right.
And so, hopefully, hopefully I start making some choices in those regards. B, hopefully, viewers, as you guys are listening to this, hopefully you're identifying not only good ideas, but seeing where they would, radically impact your life, because we're talking about stuff that would be, it's not tweaks and adjustments to your daily schedule. I mean, we're talking about trying to engage in life in a new and different way in most cases. And so hopefully you're feeling the gravity of that, and are finding those areas where you can sense that there is more work to be done. So thank you so much, Dr. Finlayson-Fife, for this is a longer interview. I guess I wanted to get as much wisdom out of you as I could. But for many viewers, they're going to want to learn more. And then you've mentioned kind of that series of interviews with a couple specifically navigating this porn issue.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about that and where people can find that?
Sure. So we actually have two offers. So the first is, A Room for Two is a podcast, a subscription podcast that I do where I work with real couples who are dealing with intimacy issues, communication challenges, religious differences. And so they're anonymous, their voices are distorted, but they're very relatable couples. And so what we're doing is gifting. We did 7 sessions with this couple, but we're gifting several of them. I'm not sure exactly how many episodes we'll put in that pack yet, but it's where Zach is his pseudonym, was looking at pornography, finally discloses it to his wife, who'd been pretty naive about it and had sort of elevated him, put him on a pedestal, was always sort of trying to earn his approval. And this just really upended the relational dynamic. And so I work with them around how to make sense of themselves in this and to bring more strength there and to become more capable of intimacy as a couple, emotionally and sexually. So, so we'll gift that, and you can listen in on those sessions. And then also I'm coming to St. George in November 6th, 7th, and 8th, and I'm doing a men's retreat. So my Art of Loving is a course that I do. It's online where you can watch it, buy it, and just be self-paced. But I'm also teaching the course live in St. George, and we still have tickets left for that. And so everybody on the summit, we're giving a $150 coupon to take off of the tuition to come to this retreat. And they're awesome. I hate to brag, but but they're real. But honestly, we did one last fall in Oregon, and just really, really good men, thoughtful, wanting to work out their relationship to sexuality, to become more capable of intimate, loving sex and marriage. And I talk about pornography in that, but eroticism and what is fearless sexuality really, and how do you get closer to it? How do you create more of it? So yeah.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Thanks so much. I'll have links so that's easily accessible for everyone, just right around this video here. And yeah, thanks again so much. And I greatly respect your wisdom. And I know that so many people that I've interacted with really care deeply about, in some ways, these perspectives are disruptive, and they find that they're really appreciative of, like, yeah, I needed something to turn things around and how I was viewing things. And so you do such an excellent job with that. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you again. And again, viewers, hopefully you have drawn something from this. Hopefully there can be some deeper thinking and some, a really big impact on what you choose to do, whether it's resolving one of those dilemmas or starting to explore part of yourself that has not been in alignment with, your higher values. So with all of that, I'll let you all go. Thanks again, Dr. Finlayson-Fife. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Taylor. Bye.